Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and sorry for the delay. No matter where you are located in the world, the UCLA Center for Middle East Development would like to welcome you to our 6th episode of CMED Chats. The CMED Chats series engages charismatic guests who are from the Middle East and North Africa, or who are connected to the region in some capacity. Our equally engaging hosts will vary throughout the series to keep the conversations diverse. Together, they will sit down for casual one-on-one chats that cover a variety of topics and highlight the many voices and realities that enrich the colorful region we lovingly know as MENA. This episode will be recorded and can be viewed on CMED's website or YouTube page within 24 hours of this broadcast. We will not be accepting questions for our live guests today. However, if you have any logistics questions, feel free to let us know in the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. And without further ado, I will pass the microphone to Eric Bordenkircher, CMED's research fellow. Eric, take it away.
Thank you, Salome, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon and welcome our guest, Hanin Ghaddar. My name is Eric Bordenkircher. I'm a CMED research fellow, and I've done a lot of work on Lebanon and had the opportunity to meet Hanin over the years. But before I talk about our relationship, let me briefly present her, give a little background. Hanin Ghaddar is the Friedman Fellow at the Washington Institute's Geldoud program on Arab politics, where she focuses on Shia politics throughout the Levant. The longtime managing editor of Lebanon's Now News website, Ghaddar shed light on a broad range of cutting-edge issues, from the evolution of Hezbollah inside Lebanon's fractured political system to Iran's growing influence throughout the Middle East. In addition, she has contributed to a number of US-based magazines and newspapers. Prior to joining Now in 2007, Ghaddar wrote for the Lebanese newspapers Safar, Nahar, and El Hayat, and also worked as a researcher for the United Nations Development Program Regional Office. Welcome, Hanin. I'd just like to tell the audience that I've known you now for getting on, I think, around 10 years. And during those 10 years, it's been always a pleasure to talk to you. My interests and my questions always heighten and increase. But the only drawback in regards to those 10 years has been the view from your office. And the view from your office when I first met you was magnificent and looked out onto the mountains of Lebanon. And when I recently saw you in Washington, D.C., the view is not quite as gorgeous. If I remember correctly, it was more of a brick wall. So I think maybe that's where we should start in regards to those kind of changing landscapes. Why, the change from Beirut to Washington, D.C., but then also maybe look at that landscape in Lebanon, which, is magnificent. You can never grow tired of looking at it, but at least, somewhat literally, but also very figuratively, that view has been increasingly tarnished. And, I think we look forward to, hearing how you look at that view and, what you think of Lebanon going forward here. So I'll hand the mic off to you, and looking forward to hearing, your feedback on these questions.
Thank you very much, Eric, for this introduction, and thank you all for having me and coming to this session to hear about Lebanon and the background, like my story like Lebanon via my story, kind of. But it's fascinating what you said, Eric, at the beginning, that you saw that mountain from my office as like magnificent, right? And I remember when I used to sit in that office and look at that mountain, I did not see the magnificence that you saw, but probably that's really the difference between people who visit Lebanon and people who live in Lebanon. I'm sure eventually started to see what's really behind the magnificence of the mountain and the beauty of Lebanon per se, when you start looking at the political scene and the stories of people who are living between these mountains. It looks magnificent, but the stories are no longer that nice, and the mountain itself is not as magnificent anymore. And this brings me, I want to highlight this because it's really all, when it comes to Lebanon, it's about perspective. international perspective versus local perspective, but also within Lebanon, each person's perspective on Lebanon itself. And we in Lebanon, the Lebanese have this saying about, like we do not have one Lebanon. There are so many Lebanons in Lebanon. And this is really all about how you see your country and your perspective to your community, your perspective to politics, to the international involvement in Lebanon, and where is really your identity as a Lebanese, right? So this is all these questions. I grew up with these questions. I was born at the very beginning, actually, of the civil war in Lebanon, which broke out in 1975. I was born in 74. So really, like all my life, I've been witnessing wars and clashes until I left, and I'm still looking at it from afar. But really, this is the main question that you have to deal with throughout these clashes. So what is the Lebanon am I fighting for? What is the Lebanon I believe in? What is my identity as a Lebanese? So at one point, you realize that there's no Lebanese identity beyond the cliches of the Lebanese food and the Lebanese music and Fairuz and all that. Everybody identify with this as the cultural side of Lebanon. But when it comes to citizenship, and citizenship not in its practical and technical term, it's as an identity, it doesn't exist simply because there is no Lebanese citizen. There's no civil law in Lebanon. It's not a civil state. It's not really a state in that sense. So no one really feels that they belong as a Lebanese to the state because the state institution does not treat you as equal citizens, as they treat you as sects. The triangle basically between the political figure, the sectarian political figure, the religious leader, and the man. And I'm saying man, not woman here for a reason, because it's really also in a system, we live in a system where women and men do not have equal rights. So this triangle of power between the religious institution, the political institution, and the man, this is really what dominates the political scene in Lebanon until today, from the very beginning. Even before the civil war, Lebanon has never really been a civil state. And this is basically all brings me back to this perspective, how you see Lebanon and how you see your place in this country, that for me, as someone who grew up in a Shia town, I don't say I'm a Shia because I don't identify as a Shia, but I did grow up in a Shia town in the south of Lebanon. And this is where I come from. So I was born as a Shia, I was raised as a Shia. I don't identify as a Shia, but I am a Shia in Lebanon, no matter how much I try. I see myself as Lebanese, but the Lebanon does not see me as Lebanese. And this is where my whole issue, actually, my whole problem with this country is. So during the Civil War, I was little, I didn't really understand what was happening until I grew up and started really to get more involved in politics and realized basically at one point that it was a sectarian war, but it was never over. We do not have in Lebanon anything that really remembers the civil war in the sense that there is accountability or collective memory. Because if you don't have a collective memory and you don't have accountability after a war like this that lasted 15 years, you are never, ever going to move on. So the civil war actually does exist. And the civil war, although the fighters are no longer fighting, but what you saw last week in Beirut, for example, with the clashes in Beirut that hit every headline in the world, this has not really did not come out of vacuum. This actually happened because of all these background identity issues, perspectives, clashes that really were never done. So this is just like some background. So if you want me to talk a little bit about myself, which I'm not really very good at, I'm always connecting my story with this, background. But just to let you know that I did my BA and my MA at the American University of Beirut, English literature as my BA, and then I did my master's in Middle Eastern Studies. And then most of my career in Lebanon was in journalism. So I wrote in Arabic for some local newspapers and regional newspapers, but mostly local. And then I worked also in English for the Now website. And then I became managing editor of this website. That was like probably my longest my longest career step. I stayed with Now for 9 years, which basically led me eventually to Washington, because I started doing more analysis as an editor. So during my time as a journalist, you also realize that you can't, when you talk about my perspective, also like the view from Lebanon versus the view from Washington, right? It is true that I had this major view and big office in Lebanon where you feel that this is a place of power, right? Where I'm like the editor of this big website, managing a team of 25 people with a beautiful mountain in front of me. I was tied with so many red lines in Lebanon. There isn't like freedom of expression in Lebanon. In the region, you see Lebanon, you think, there's freedom. Women are more free, journalists are free, there are so many media institutions, but this is all just a facade that hides behind it. We don't have, it's not an autocracy, it's not a dictatorship in Lebanon, but there are so many red lines. And what's different today is, but when I was in Lebanon, so you work for a newspaper, you are free to say whatever you want about the opponents, but that's not freedom of expression. There is no investigative journalism in Lebanon. So that's basically another red line where you cannot really access information. And this is a major issue. Access of information is just so difficult in Lebanon. Today, things have really started, and I feel that I left Lebanon and I came to Washington 5 years ago, and this was probably, I did not know it back then, but part of me knew that Lebanon is not going to end well. And we see it today, and I think the best decision I've made is to move, to leave Lebanon at this point, especially as a single mom who really wants her kid to get out of this. And it's the best decision I probably made because Lebanon today is unlivable. It's not just the political crisis and the economic crisis. You have a feeling, not just because of the collapse of the economy. It's not just a financial issue. It's self-inflicted. We did this to ourselves. We literally did this to ourselves. We're self-inflicted crisis that has a problem beyond the technical financial issues and reforms. It's not about reforms. It's not about democracy. It's people went to the streets in 2019. I was here. I wanted to go and I couldn't go simply because if I go, I will be arrested or killed. And that was very clear when my friend Luqman Aslim was assassinated because he didn't leave. Just to give you a background of this, I left Lebanon in 2016. Part of the reason why I left, not because I felt that Lebanon is facing a crisis, but also I was under a lot of threats by Hezbollah because I am a woman, Shia woman, who is critical of Hezbollah, and that's a big no for them. If I were not a Shia, they would have dealt with me differently. If I were not a woman, they would have dealt with me differently. But for an Islamist party like Hezbollah, for them, a Shia woman should be submissive, should not be critical. So I was under a lot of pressure, a lot of threats, and I left because of that. And I know that when I left and joined the Washington Institute, they made sure that I don't go back because they sued me. They went to the military court, and the military court is a tool for oppression in Lebanon. It's not about the military. And I got a sentence, 6 months in prison, which was overturned and sent to the civil court, which is still there in the drawer somewhere. So if I go, I'm done. So I wanted to be there in 2019. I couldn't go. And part of me was hurting that I couldn't be in the streets. It was the most beautiful moment. Really, the most beautiful moment in Lebanon. 2018, the trash crisis, that was never this. Even in 2005, when the Cedar Revolution happened in Lebanon, and the Lebanese, which led to the withdrawal of the Syrian army from Lebanon in 2005, that was a nice moment, but it was not the same as 2019. The difference is that it was organic. 2019 was really organic. It has zero connection to any political party. It was secular. It was across the country. Everyone in the country demonstrated. It was not central, as in like everybody came to Beirut. You saw that big demonstrations from the south, Shia towns in the south, to Beirut, to the mountains, all the way to Tripoli. So this was very unique. And also it was non-sectarian, cross-sectarian. So this was very, very unique. The problem with that is that it threatened everyone because it was that organic. It threatened everyone. It led to the collapse of the government. But as you saw, Eric, you know about Lebanon, the Hariri prime minister resigned, left from the door, came back from the window, then resigned, and we got another one who is exactly the same thing. Simply, this political establishment will not go. Will not go. And people want to go to the streets again, but after 2019 moment and the disappointment that it came with and all the economic challenges that it came with, if you want to go to the streets, you need gas to fill your car. In order to go to the streets, there's no gas. You need to eat before you need to feed your kids before you go and demonstrate. And that's mainly the problem today. And the main issue, really, like the big elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, is that there's one authority in Lebanon that is stopping all the reforms, that is stopping all change, that is really protecting corruption, which is not just the political class. When you say killon yani killon, that is all of them means all of them. It's a beautiful slogan, but within all of them, which is all the political class, you have one big elephant in the room, which is Hezbollah, that is making sure that nothing works. Without this umbrella that protects everyone, they will be vulnerable, and then you can pressure them to change. They use violence, they kill people, they threaten institutions, including the judge that is investigating the Beirut port blast, as this is happening as we speak. Everything, nothing can change as long as Hezbollah is in power. And Hezbollah is not just a political party in Lebanon that has, like so much support that it's so powerful. No, it is powerful not because it has so much support, and not even because it has even Shia support today is really dwindling. They are powerful because they are an army. So in a way, a lot of people in Lebanon, there's a huge gap also between international perspective in Lebanon. We go back to the perspective issue and Lebanese people. Outside Lebanon, Lebanese and international community and experts in Lebanon see this as an economic crisis, as a financial crisis that will be resolved probably by reforms and elections. But the problem really is that there is an occupation in Lebanon, that nothing will change as long as we have Hezbollah's arms pointed at our heads, threatening us with assassination every day. So that's, for me, the main issue. And elections with arms. So there's always this conflict between ballots and bullets, right? So who wins? We'll talk about this.
Yes. You painted quite a grim picture here of the current situation. You mentioned how Lebanon views you as an individual. I guess my question would be, how do you view Lebanon in the coming years, maybe 2 years from now, 5 years? Is there hope for optimism? What can the international community do? You write a lot about, policy. Is there stuff that the United States should be focused on? What are your perspectives on that?
Yeah, I think on the short term, I'm not very hopeful at all, actually. I'm not hopeful at all. In the short term, things are going to get worse. And things are going to get worse, not just economically. People, they're like, we're facing serious starvation. The US policy today is more focused on humanitarian aid, which is great, but humanitarian aid is not a solution. It's just patching up a problem that is only going to get bigger and bigger. So you have to just send more humanitarian aid. And this is not really a policy. This is just to make sure that the problem is delayed until we have more bandwidth and focus to deal with it. And that's where the US position today. They want to help, obviously. So humanitarian aid is the easiest, cheapest way of helping Lebanon, including the electricity from Jordan and electricity and gas from Jordan and Egypt, plus humanitarian aid, food items, etc. And the other one is security assistance, that is the US Army, which is also very cheap. If you think about it, it doesn't cost much, like to help the US, to help the Lebanese army continue at least, like functioning to a certain extent, not fighting the fight or really defending Lebanon against occupation. This is not the objective of the US assistance to the Lebanese army. The objective is to keep some kind of security and stability in certain areas where there might be a problem. And from the beginning, this objective of the assistance was not really to face Hezbollah or the Iranian occupation of Lebanon. The objective was really to contain certain insurgencies inside Lebanon, mostly, especially like recently with the Syria crisis, where the army did really actually, considerably, according to US perspective, a good job in terms of stopping ISIS and Al-Qaeda from Lebanon. However, the problem is that this created a real issue with perspective again, right? So why is the Lebanese army today going after Sunni extremism and Sunni terrorism and not Shia terrorism? Hezbollah is classified, right, as a terrorist organization in the US. So why? This is the main question in Lebanon. We know why. We know that this is not something that is on the agenda because this is a big deal and needs more than assistance to the Lebanese army. The Lebanese army, despite all its capabilities, cannot really stand up to another army like Hezbollah with much better military capabilities and resources. But in Lebanon, this is a perspective that you cannot address, right? As the US, if you want, there's no way to address these questions, like why the army is going after Sunni terrorism and not Shia terrorism. And this is actually, this sentence that I just said got me in trouble with in Lebanon and got me the 6 months sentence in prison. This exact sentence that I just said. And but this is something, sorry?
I was going to say, it is kind of ironic though, too, because the Lebanese armed forces are doing the work of Hezbollah in a sense that a lot of these Sunni extremists have a strong dislike for Hezbollah, and in a sense are protecting Hezbollah from these Sunni extremists, correct?
Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So it depends really on what kind. So my perspective of the army, if you want me to explain how this works and why this happens sometimes, I don't think the whole institution is infiltrated by Hezbollah. This is a big discussion in Washington, right? Is the Lebanese army a Hezbollah institution like other institutions, or is it, not independent? It's neither. It's not independent. It's not a Hezbollah institution. And I think the U.S. assistance to the Lebanese army is important and has to continue, not because they are doing great in terms of fighting Hezbollah, but simply because it's a leverage. The U.S. leverage in Lebanon is only this. There's no other leverage. If the U.S. wants to continue having this leverage, so it's really a question of leverage. If the U.S. wants to continue having this leverage inside Lebanon in terms of influencing certain policies, especially when it comes to security inside Lebanon, this is the only leverage. However, is it enough to just give money to the army with no conditions? I don't think so. I think this aid has to come with more pressure and definitely more conditions. And more pressure has to be used in terms like, if this is the leverage, use it. You can use it. And I think there has been some cases where the US used this leverage in order to stop certain things or, move certain things, but not on a wider scale. So a lot can be done today, especially now that the army really needs the US assistance. Without the US assistance today, the army will not be able to pay salaries or really contain the desertion. A lot of people are just not showing up to work. A lot of people, soldiers, and they can't do anything at this point. Usually they send them to the military court. They got punished. You just cannot desert. But today this is happening because it's not enough. $20 per month or $40 per month is just simply not enough to feed a family. So the US is stepping up in that sense, but it's a leverage that needs to be used. Regarding how the army can really keep a balance with Hezbollah. It really depends, again, on this assistance. If I'm talking about conditionality, for example, there's a lot of certain battalions and certain, figures that should not benefit from the assistance. And these are the pro-Hezbollah people. So, for example, the military court that persecutes journalists, the military court that has no business in dealing with civilians at all, should not benefit from the US assistance. This is not something that should be ignored. For example, I'm just giving an example. There are certain battalions that also do not benefit from the assistance because the officers, it's really about the officers. At the end of the day, it's really about the senior officials. So if they are pro-Hezbollah, known to be pro-Hezbollah, are vetted to be pro-Hezbollah, then they should not benefit from the assistance. Others should. And that's how you really turn around the army institution. But the discussion, the argument that the US should stop assisting the Lebanon's armed forces, I think that's too simple. And I think this is basically asking the US to give up its only leverage in Lebanon.
Got it. Why don't we move away from the institutions for a moment and look more at the people? And you talked about this kind of organic movement in 2019 that you wanted to be a part of, and I sense that you have great pride and hope for it. Is there still hope? Where do you see this going? How do you see it playing out, particularly maybe with elections and maybe beyond these upcoming elections next year?
We cannot lose hope. That's our only choice. And there is a Syrian playwright called Saadallah Wannous who has this famous saying, "ما أضيق العيش لولا فسحة العمل." Yes, فسحة الأمل. Without hope, life will be too difficult or too limited or too, I can't literally translate that. But basically, this is something to say, basically, that in our part of the world, in Lebanon today, the only choice we have is hope, because we have to try. If you don't try, it means you're giving up, you're surrendering. And that's a form of resistance. Hope is a form of resistance in that case, right? So you need to have hope. And I personally will never give up hope. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, right? I'm working still on Lebanon. I'm doing recommendations and writing about policy and do that because I really simply, from this space as a fellow at the Institute, my role, I think, is to use this in order to channel this hope into trying. Otherwise, I would go and make more money because this is not simply, some place where you can get rich. But that's what drives us, hope, right? How realistic is that? It's a different question. I'm not hopeful. Again, on the short term, I'm not hopeful. These groups are working. The people who went to the streets, there are a lot of groups that mushroomed out of these revolution or protest, whatever you want to call it. Are they perfect? No. Are they united? No. Maybe it's not a big problem if they're not united. At the end of the day, democracy is about diversity, right? You want different groups, but at the end of the day, also you want some kind of coordination. It's the whole idea of you have to be united in order to win the elections. They don't have to be united, but they have to coordinate. So far, there is some kind of coordination, but I'm not very hopeful because at the end of the day, the political establishment is so strong and they're the only people with money and we're the only people with resources and access to institutions. Their chances of winning, not democratically, obviously, but forcing themselves into the system and after 2022 is high. But my hope is that look at Iraq, right? The elections in Iraq, they are not great. The guy who got, the majority of the votes, Muqtada Sadr, is not actually ideal, but Iran's militias lost. That gives me some hope, right? So on the short term, this elections per se, not much might change. But even if you bring in a few people, right, here and there, that's, of course, if the elections actually happen. I have a feeling that Hezbollah, they feel that they might actually lose the majority in the parliament, they will find a way to cancel the elections or postpone it. So, but let's say it happens and you get in 7 to 9 to 10 people into the parliament, then that's a great start. I'm thinking very long term, really, really long term. On the long term, these things are temporary. Think about, the history of the world, right? These groups cannot last forever, especially after what the way they're reacting today in Lebanon. The corruption is a deeply rooted thing that needs to be resolved, and it will be resolved eventually if there's a will. Once you get rid of these, groups that are today, according to many Lebanese, are stopping everything, occupying Lebanon. So today, what do you do about the question of Hezbollah, right? So this is the main question. Short term, you can't do much. The Lebanese people cannot really fight Hezbollah. They can survive with Hezbollah, but they cannot really fight Hezbollah. But I'm thinking long term. I'm talking years, like decades. These are not regimes that can last. Historically speaking, these regimes do not last. What comes afterwards is a big question, but you need to keep trying and surviving and not giving up and hoping, because at the end of the day, the people on the ground are trying. So you need to help them. You asked about how can we help the groups on the ground? Protect them. They'll do the work. I think they need protection, and this is where the leverage of the U.S. assistance comes in. These people cannot do much if they are threatened, if they're assassinated. They need protection, and the Lebanese army should protect these people, not go after them.
Got it. So you said the Lebanese people cannot fight Hezbollah. So would it be safe to say that the events of about 2 weeks ago now are just flare-ups, and we're not going to see too much further violence going on in the streets and between various groups, or am I wrong to say that?
So this is a big question today. Like, how are these clashes going to develop, right? So are they going to become kind of a civil war or not? Let's look a little bit back, a few months back. This is not the first or the last street clashes that Lebanon witnessed with Hezbollah per se. There are two more incidents that happened earlier this year, in addition to the Tayuni incidents, where Hezbollah was in direct clashes, not necessarily armed, like in Druze village, where they stopped, the residents of this village stopped Hezbollah's convoy with rockets that were planned to be fired at Israel. They stopped them and basically used violence, not clashes, to send them back. There was another incident where the Sunni tribes of Khaldi also clashed with Hezbollah. And then there are the Tayuni clashes. So this is not the first, and it's not going to be the last. There will not be a civil war in the traditional term of civil war, because it's very simple. No one can really beat Hezbollah in a civil war. We're talking about small groups with some arms here and there, and then in front of them, you have an army supported by Iran. So with so many weapons that are not great in street clashes, but still, the civil war means Hezbollah will win. So no one is going to go for that. But I don't think the people are going to just sit home and do nothing. The only way of expression today in Lebanon, since you cannot go to the streets, since you cannot express yourself in a democratic way, unfortunately, the only way to express yourself is in these incidents. When there's so much aggression, like emotional turmoil, and so much anger at Hezbollah, the way they're running the country and the way they're stopping everything from happening, this anger has to manifest itself. And if it cannot manifest itself democratically through ballots, it will manifest itself violently through bullets and through street violence. So I'm expecting a lot more of this: security incidents, street clashes. Unfortunately, it will become even more aggressive at one point, but this is unfortunately the only way left. I'm not justifying it, but I'm not surprised.
Got it. When we talk about Lebanon, I think we always have to consider the international dimension, or I think, unfortunately, Lebanon has become kind of the international playground of a lot of different countries. Mm-hmm. We've already talked about the United States. Maybe the best area to focus on now is kind of the regional element. Do you see any of the regional dynamics, with whether it be the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear issue, the fighting in Syria, or the continued fighting in Syria, having an impact on the, the dynamics and the issues that we've discussed here for the last 30 minutes or so?
Yeah, definitely. Listen, today Lebanon is isolated, but also connected. It's isolated from its Arab depths because of because, like if you think about the Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, the Gulfis in general, like all this is today not interested in helping Lebanon because of the Hezbollah problem. All the assistance used to come from Saudi Arabia to Lebanon, from the Emiratis. It's just today made it very clear that no assistance to Lebanon, despite the crisis, as long as Hezbollah is in control. It makes sense. Hezbollah is in Yemen, helping the Houthis bomb Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So it's normal that these countries are not going to help Hezbollah's government. I totally get it. But also that's not because Hezbollah is in charge in Lebanon, because Hezbollah today is no longer a Lebanese militia. Hezbollah has moved to the region and moved Lebanon to the region, mainly causing this. Hezbollah is in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and God knows where else, right? They're not today, especially after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in 2019, Hezbollah today, despite the new guy, Khani, is not an Arab speaker. He doesn't understand the region. He doesn't understand the language. And when you don't understand the language, it's very difficult to understand the culture and communicate with people. So today, Hezbollah is kind of the acting, leader of the militias in the region, and they got a lot more responsibilities in coordinating among the militias. So they are today the leading regional arm of the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. So they have opened the borders of Lebanon to all this Iran's regional operation. There's no way Lebanon can survive that. Lebanon is too fragile, Lebanon is too small, and it's opening Lebanon to the region through Iran's operation, but isolating Lebanon from the other parts of the region, which is assistance, prosperity, deals, business deals, trade deals, investments, etc. This is completely closed off, but it's open to arms smuggling, drug smuggling. You have no idea how much money they're making from drug smuggling, Captagon, all that stuff. So Lebanon today is open to all that bad stuff, while the good things are not happening, are not coming back. So this is Hezbollah. This is all Hezbollah. So are we going to really look at the borders in this sense? And this is another question for the US at this point, or the international community. The border here is not just a border. The border here is policy. So this is another question, whether this is something that a UN resolution such as 1701 would be implemented, or 1559. This is another big question, where are these resolutions?
Got it. Just a side note, you'd mentioned about the United States protecting the protesters and helping them out in that regard. Do the Emiratis, the Saudis, Qataris, have they done stuff like that? Is it a good idea to pitch those ideas to them, or are they adverse to kind of helping those elements because they see it as detrimental to their ultimate objectives in Lebanon?
Listen, I don't think that the civil society groups, the secular civil society groups, are getting a lot of assistance from anyone, right? They get, some international organizations do some training, support some media here and there, journalists training, etc. But no, and you don't want that. Anyway, you don't want, I don't think the civil society groups, and actually grassroots movements, I think is better than the civil society groups in that term. These movements do not want that kind of assistance. I don't think so. I've never heard it from anyone. It's give us money, right? This is not what they want. And I don't think it's a good idea to just give money to these groups, because it's really about protection. They're doing the work. They are actually doing the work. It's about protection. It's about helping them coordinate. So really creating a safe space for them to coordinate, assistance for them to coordinate, protecting them, and making sure that actually elections happen on time and elections actually happen with international supervision, the way it happened in Iraq, because this is very important. Without international supervision, unfortunately, there will be a lot of violation and rigging of the elections, of the results. So, and that basically happens as transparent and as free as possible. It's not going to be ideal, but as like this is the way you help these people. I don't think they need the money. Like I got calls from my friends, for example, in Lebanon, especially in the south, who live under Hezbollah's like direct rule, who call me and who when I ask them what they want, they simply say, I just want to be protected. Last week I just got a call from someone asking me for protection, which I cannot provide. But he's like, please, I don't want anything. I don't we don't need money. He said that we don't need money. We don't need training. We don't need logistical supports. We do this. We know how to do this. Lebanese people know how to do politics. What we need is protection, and that's not being provided.
Got it. I guess maybe the final question I have, since we're starting to wrap up here, maybe to kind of draft off the issue of protection, do you think the investigation into the port blast in Beirut, do you think that investigation will be able to be protected, will be able to operate independently and arrive at a decision that will allow for accountability, accountability for that devastating, deadly act?
Mm-hmm. Well, I hope so. The investigation of the port is not essential because it's about the port itself. It's really a crossroad of whether this little space in Lebanon can be protected or not. And this space is represented today by the judge, Tariq Bitar. It's not just about the investigation into the port, which is highly, highly important, right? This is like a major crime in Lebanon, but it's also more than that. It's about whether this space can be saved, because also this space can be supported to help with other issues, not just like elections is coming, other assassinations. If you give up now, more people will be killed. If you don't give up now, you protect many Lebanese who actually are trying. So this is really beyond the victims. It's about the victims for sure, but it's also beyond the victims. It's about accountability, it's about justice, and it's about saving lives.
Got it.
And it's about me maybe at one point being able to go to Lebanon without being killed.
I hope that.
Yeah.
Well, Hanin, I could probably ask you questions all day about stuff. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And like I said at the beginning,
my pleasure.
Listening to you talk my interests and creates more and more questions. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of time or any time left, but I do agree with you. I think that view of the mountain is a facade, or is increasingly becoming a facade. Sadly, as it is breathtaking, and I don't know how you got any work done with that office view going back, I guess, 10 years ago now. What's that?
You stopped seeing it at one point.
I think you're right about that. You begin to ignore it, yes, because of all the other prevalent problems. But there's such kind of hope and stuff. But hopefully that hope, like you said, will reappear down the road, not too far. Okay. I appreciate your joining us here today for these chats. As a member of CMED, I'd like to thank everyone who joined us here today, and stay on keep looking at our website, and we'll let you know about future chats in regards to the Middle East and North Africa. And once again, thank you, Hanin, for your time, and thank you everyone for joining us. You're welcome. I hope everyone else has thank you, and I hope everyone else has a great rest of their day, wherever this finds them. Thank you.